She cheated on me. Not just last night. Not just once. No, Vanessa had been living an entirely different life. A secret so twisted and elaborate that when the truth finally came to light, it didn't just break me. It obliterated everything I thought I knew. But here's the real kicker. She wasn't just having an affair. She was engaged to someone else, while still married to me. It started with a message. A simple, innocuous notification that buzzed on her phone while she was in the shower. I hadn't meant to look. I wasn't that kind of husband. But the screen lit up just long enough for me to see the words that changed everything. I can't wait to call you my wife tomorrow. Love you, baby. My breath hitched. My wife. Tomorrow. For a moment, my brain refused to process it. There had to be some mistake. Maybe it was an inside joke. Maybe it was one of those stupid wedding reality shows she loved to watch. But then I saw the contact name. Ethan. And just like that, my world shifted. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember moving. I just remember the sensation of my heartbeat slowing, steadying, not with panic, but with something far colder. I had never been the jealous type, never been the insecure husband who checked her phone or questioned her late nights. But this was different. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think. Tomorrow. He said tomorrow. She was supposed to be on a business trip this weekend, wasn't she? Flying out for some corporate conference she'd been talking about for months? No. She was getting married. To someone else. While still married to me. The realization sank in, and suddenly, everything about the past year made sense. The strange phone calls she'd taken in another room, the sudden weekends away, the way she had started pulling away from me emotionally. I had told myself it was stress, that she was just tired, that maybe, if I worked harder, loved her more, she'd come back to me the way she used to. But the truth was so much worse than I had ever imagined. Vanessa hadn't just been unfaithful. She had been building a whole new life behind my back. And tomorrow, she planned to walk down the aisle as another man's bride. I clenched my jaw, staring at the message for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, deliberately, I placed her phone back where I had found it and sat down. She had no idea that I knew. Not yet. And that meant I had time. Tomorrow, she thought she would start a new life. Tomorrow, she thought she would get away with everything. Tomorrow, she was in for the shock of her life. Because I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to make sure that when she walked down that aisle, it would be a wedding she'd never forget. I didn't sleep that night, not because of the pain, though there was plenty of that, but because my mind was already working, calculating, turning over the pieces of Vanessa's betrayal like a puzzle waiting to be solved. She had spent months, maybe longer, planning her escape from our marriage, weaving a second life behind my back. She thought she had covered her tracks. She thought I was too blind, too trusting, too pathetic to ever suspect her. And that's what fueled me more than the betrayal itself. At 3 a.m., I sat in the dark at our kitchen table, my fingers wrapped around a glass of whiskey. Vanessa was asleep upstairs, oblivious, wrapped in the comfort of our bed. The same bed where she had kissed me goodnight just hours ago, telling me she loved me. How many nights had she kissed me after being with him? I squeezed the glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. But anger wasn't going to be enough. If I was going to do this, I had to be smart. Vanessa had spent months orchestrating this deception, believing she held all the power. But now I was the one with the advantage. She didn't know that I knew. And that was going to be her downfall. I took out my phone, my fingers steady as I typed the message. Me, hey, Ethan. I think we should talk. I had found his number easily enough. It was right there in her messages, thread after thread of sweet nothings, plans for their future, and wedding details she should have been planning with me. The man about to marry my wife. A part of me wanted to go to his house right then and there, to put my fist through his smug, unsuspecting face. But I held back. He wasn't the enemy. Not really. Vanessa was the one who had lied to us both. My phone vibrated barely a minute later. Ethan. Who is this? Me, Mark. Vanessa's husband. The typing bubble appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. Ethan, nice try. Vanessa's divorced. I almost laughed. That's what she told him? That she was already divorced? That I was just some past mistake? I didn't waste time arguing. I scrolled through her messages, found a picture she had sent him, a mirror selfie in our bedroom, in a dress I had bought her for our anniversary last year. I forwarded it without a word. The three dots popped up instantly. This time they stayed. A full minute passed before he responded. Ethan, what the hell is this? Me, your fiancé. In the house we still share. Lying to both of us. Another long pause. Then, Ethan, where can we meet? I smirked. Good. He wasn't an idiot. I gave him the address of a small bar downtown, far from prying eyes. Now, all I had to do was wait. The next morning, Vanessa woke up early, like she always did before a trip. She padded downstairs in her silk robe, stretching, her eyes barely open as she headed for the coffee machine. Morning, she murmured, her voice still thick with sleep. I watched her from the couch, my face unreadable. Morning. She kissed my cheek, so easily, so casually, then turned to pour her coffee. I stared at her, wondering how many times she had done that after being with him. The thought made my stomach turn. She took a sip of coffee, glancing at the clock. My flight leaves in a few hours. Can you drive me to the airport? I almost laughed. She had no idea that everything was crumbling around her. Of course, I said smoothly. Anything for my wife. She didn't flinch. Of course, she didn't. She thought she had already erased that title from her life. I watched as she sipped her coffee, scrolling through her phone, probably texting Ethan, telling him she was on her way. Let her. She had no idea that when she arrived at that altar tomorrow, her world was going to fall apart in front of everyone, and I would be there to watch. Ethan was already at the bar when I arrived. He was sitting in a dimly lit corner, gripping a half-empty glass of whiskey like it was the only thing holding him together. I could see it, the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hand. He wasn't just angry. He was broken. Good. I wanted him broken. I wanted him to feel what I felt, to let the betrayal sink deep into his bones. Because this wasn't just about exposing Vanessa. This was about making sure she never got away with it. His eyes snapped to mine as I slid into the seat across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just studied each other, two men connected by the same woman, the same lie. Ethan was younger than me, early 30s, clean-cut, the kind of guy Vanessa used to go for before she married me. He looked like he had money, probably the reason she latched onto him in the first place. Finally, he broke the silence. Tell me everything. I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. Where do you want me to start? The part where she told you she was divorced? Or the part where she's been sleeping in my bed while planning a wedding with you? His jaw clenched. I don't believe it. But his voice wavered. He was already doubting her. I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. See for yourself. He hesitated, then picked it up. I watched as he scrolled through the messages, his face paling with every word, every photo. There it was, proof of her deception in black and white. The moment he reached the picture of her in our bedroom, his grip tightened on the phone. He set it down carefully, like he was afraid he might snap it in half. She told me she was finalizing the divorce, he said, more to himself than to me. That it was just paperwork holding things up. I let out a dry laugh. And you never checked? His eyes darkened as he met my gaze. I trusted her. There it was. That same naive, pathetic trust that had blinded me for months. I almost pitied him. Almost. I signaled the bartender for another drink. She played us both, Ethan. But now we have a choice. We can let her walk away from this untouched, or we can make sure she faces the consequences. He exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair. What are you suggesting? I smirked. Let her have her wedding. His head snapped up. What? She thinks she's getting away with this. Let her believe it. Let her walk down that aisle. Let her look into your eyes and think she's won. I leaned in closer, my voice low and deliberate. And then, when she's standing there, expecting a happily ever after, we expose her. Ethan swallowed hard, his knuckles white against the edge of the table. Imagine it, I continued. Her family, her friends, everyone she's been lying to, watching, judging, knowing. For a long moment, he said nothing, just sat there, processing. Then, slowly, A dark smile spread across his face. I'm in. Vanessa was glowing. She stood in front of the full-length mirror in a silk robe, her makeup flawless, her hair curled to perfection. I watched from the doorway as she adjusted her earrings, humming softly to herself, completely unaware that today wasn't going to end the way she imagined. Do you like it? She asked, catching my reflection behind her. I forced a smile. You look perfect. And she did. It wasn't a lie. Vanessa had always been beautiful, but today? Today, she radiated something different. Confidence. Victory. She thought she had won. Thought she had outmaneuvered me, wrapped me up in a neat little lie and walked away unscathed. But she was standing on a trapdoor, and in just a few hours, it was going to swing open beneath her feet. I stepped forward, reaching out as if to fix the strap of her robe, but in reality, I just wanted to look into her eyes. Did she feel any guilt at all? Any hesitation? No. She was completely at peace. I smiled again, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. I should let you finish getting ready. You have a big day ahead. She beamed at me, completely oblivious. Thank you for being so supportive about this, Mark. It means everything to me. Oh, I bet it does. I turned and walked out of the room before the rage in my chest made me do something premature. I still had a role to play. The game wasn't over yet. I met Ethan at the venue an hour before the ceremony. The place was extravagant. Crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, a string quartet playing softly in the background. Vanessa had outdone herself. Too bad she wouldn't be enjoying it for long. Ethan looked sharp in his tailored suit, but there was tension in the way he adjusted his cuffs, like he still wasn't sure if he could go through with this. You ready? I asked. He exhaled slowly. You really think this is the best way? I clapped a hand on his shoulder. She didn't hesitate to lie to you. To lie to me. To plan an entire future with you, while still sharing a bed with me. I leaned in slightly. She doesn't deserve to walk away quietly. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Let's do this. We took our places. The guests arrived, filling the seats with excited whispers and flashing cameras. Vanessa's family, her friends, people who had no idea they were about to witness something unforgettable. I sat in the back, unnoticed, while Ethan stood at the altar, playing the role of the adoring groom one last time. Then, the music changed. Everyone turned as Vanessa appeared at the end of the aisle, breathtaking in white lace, her smile wide, radiant. She clutched her bouquet, stepping forward slowly, basking in the moment. This was it. With every step she took, the noose tightened. She thought she was walking toward her future. She had no idea she was walking into the biggest humiliation of her life. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Showtime. Vanessa reached the altar, her veil trailing behind her like a ghost of the lies she had spun. The guests sighed in admiration, cameras flashing, the air thick with anticipation. This was supposed to be the happiest moment of her life. Ethan took her hands. His grip was steady, his expression unreadable. Vanessa, oblivious to the storm about to break, smiled up at him, eyes shining. The officiant cleared his throat. We are gathered here today. But Ethan raised a hand, stopping him. I'm sorry, he said, his voice calm, yet sharp enough to cut through the ceremony like a blade. Before we continue, I have something to say. Murmurs rippled through the guests. Vanessa tilted her head, confusion flickering across her face. Ethan, she whispered. He turned toward the crowd. I want to thank all of you for coming today, for celebrating what was supposed to be the start of something beautiful. His voice was steady, but I could see his fingers tighten slightly around hers. But I've just learned something. Vanessa's smile wavered. What are you? Ethan cut her off. I've just learned that the woman standing beside me, the woman I was about to marry, is already someone else's wife. The room fell into stunned silence. Vanessa's breath hitched. Ethan, what? He dropped her hands. I know everything, Vanessa, he said, his voice lower now, dangerously cold. I know about Mark. I know about your marriage. I know you've been lying to me for months, telling me you were divorced, planning a future with me while still sleeping in his bed. Gasps erupted in the crowd. Someone dropped a champagne flute, The sharp shatter echoed through the grand hall. Vanessa turned pale. This isn't what you think. And then I stood up. Slowly, deliberately, I stepped forward from the back row, buttoning my suit jacket. Heads turned as I made my way down the aisle, the weight of my presence crashing down on Vanessa like a tidal wave. Her lips parted in pure horror. "Hi, sweetheart," I said smoothly. "Miss me?" Her bouquet slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. The entire room was watching now. Guests whispering, shifting uncomfortably, pulling out their phones. This isn't," Vanessa stammered, looking between me and Ethan like a cornered animal. "Go on," I prompted. "Tell them, Vanessa. Tell them how you spent last night in our house, in our bed, and then woke up this morning and put on this dress to marry someone else." Her mother's hand flew to her mouth in shock. Ethan turned to the guests, shaking his head. "For months, she's been leading me on, making me believe she was mine, that we had a future." He let out a dry laugh. "Turns out, I was just another name on her list." Vanessa's eyes welled with tears. Whether from guilt, embarrassment, or desperation, I couldn't tell. "Ethan, please." "No," he stepped back. "No more lies. No more excuses." I crossed my arms. "So, Vanessa, who's it gonna be? Me?" I gestured toward Ethan. "Or him?" She looked between us, chest rising and falling, struggling to form words. But it didn't matter anymore, because she had already lost. Ethan turned to the officiant and exhaled sharply. "I think we're done here." He walked off, shaking his head, leaving Vanessa standing there in front of 100 horrified guests, humiliated, abandoned. I leaned in close to her ear, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Enjoy your honeymoon, sweetheart." Then I turned and walked away. For the first time in years, I felt free. I walked out of that wedding hall with my head high, the taste of victory sharp on my tongue. Behind me, I could still hear the gasps, the whispers, an entire crowd trying to process what they had just witnessed. 100 eyes had watched Vanessa's carefully crafted life crumble around her. The golden girl, the perfect bride, exposed as nothing more than a fraud. And the best part? I didn't even have to raise my voice. By the time I reached the parking lot, Ethan was already there, leaning against his car, staring at the ground. His tie was undone, his hands shoved into his pockets. He looked up when he saw me. "That was brutal," he muttered. I smirked. She deserved worse. Ethan let out a slow breath, dragging a hand through his hair. I should have seen it sooner. The signs were there. The secrecy, the way she avoided questions. Hell, she even flinched when I mentioned wanting to meet her ex-husband. He let out a bitter laugh. "Guess now I know why." I shrugged. "We both fell for the same act. You're not the first guy she's lied to. And if today hadn't happened, you sure as hell wouldn't have been the last." He nodded, kicking at a loose pebble on the pavement. "So what now?" That was the question, wasn't it? Vanessa was inside, drowning in humiliation, her friends and family too stunned to even comfort her. She would have to explain herself to every guest, answer for every lie. There was no escaping this, no rewriting this story to make herself the victim. She had been caught, and she had lost. "She'll come crawling back," Ethan said suddenly. I turned to him. "What?" He exhaled sharply. "Not to me. To you." His voice was bitter, but his expression was knowing. "She's got nowhere else to go now. The wedding's off. Everyone knows the truth. She can't run from it anymore. So what does she do?" I clenched my jaw. "She goes back to what's familiar," he continued. "She tries to convince you that you're the only one who ever really mattered, that she made a mistake, that you can fix things." He shook his head. "It's all she has left." I wanted to dismiss it, to say there was no way she would be that delusional. But deep down, I knew Ethan was right. Vanessa wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. And if she thought there was even a sliver of a chance to crawl her way back into my life, she'd take it. I let out a slow breath, a smirk tugging at my lips. "Then I guess I'll have to be ready when she does." Ethan let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "You're a cold bastard." I shrugged. I learned from the best. We stood there in silence for a moment, both of us staring at the wreckage of what had almost been. Then, without another word, Ethan extended his hand. I looked at it for a beat before gripping it firmly. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too." And just like that, he got into his car and drove off, leaving the ruined wedding and Vanessa far behind. I stayed for a moment longer, savoring the cool evening air, the weight of finality settling in my chest. Then I turned, walked to my car, and drove home. I knew this wasn't over. Vanessa wasn't done yet, but neither was I. I knew it would happen. I just didn't expect it to be so soon. 2 days after the wedding that never was, I was sitting in my living room, a glass of whiskey in my hand, finally enjoying the quiet of a Vanessa-free life. No lies, no manipulation, no wondering if the woman I loved was hiding something behind her perfect smile. Then the knock came. I didn't move right away, just sat there, staring at the door, my pulse steady. Another knock, softer this time. I already knew who it was. With a slow sigh, I set my drink down and stood. This was inevitable. She had nowhere else to go. I opened the door, and there she was. Vanessa stood on my doorstep, drenched from the rain, her makeup streaked, her wedding dress, the same one she had walked down the aisle in, now crumpled and stained. She clutched it like it was some kind of relic, a piece of a life she was still desperately trying to hold on to. Her eyes were red, puffy from crying. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, she let out a shuddering breath. "Mark." I raised an eyebrow. "Vanessa." She swallowed hard, shifting her weight, her arms tightening around the dress. "Can I come in?" I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Why?" Her lip trembled. "Because I have nowhere else to go." There it was. She wasn't here for me. She was here because she had burned every other bridge, because Ethan had walked away, because her family had probably turned their backs in disgust. She was here because I was the last option. She thought she could manipulate me the way she always had, but she didn't realize that I had changed. I let out a low chuckle. "You really think you can just show up here, looking pitiful, and I'll what? Take you back? Pretend none of this happened?" She blinked rapidly, fresh tears slipping down her cheeks. "No, I don't know. She took a shaky breath. "I made a mistake, Mark." I tilted my head. "Which one?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Was it the mistake of cheating on me, or the mistake of getting caught?" She flinched. I smiled. "That's what I thought." She let out a quiet sob. "I never stopped loving you." I laughed, actually laughed. "You don't love anyone but yourself, Vanessa." Her eyes darted away, like she couldn't bear to hear the truth spoken aloud. I let the silence stretch between us, let her sit in the weight of her own failure. Finally, she whispered, "Please, I don't have anywhere else to go." I studied her for a long moment, my expression unreadable. Then I stepped aside. She blinked in surprise. "You're letting me in?" I smirked. "Of course." Relief flooded her face as she stepped past me, the scent of rain and desperation trailing after her. I shut the door behind her and locked it, not to keep her in, but to make sure I controlled exactly how this ended. Vanessa stood in my living room, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor, clutching her ruined wedding dress like it was the last thing tethering her to reality. She thought she had won the moment I let her in. She had no idea I was about to shut the door on her for good. I watched as she took in the room, her eyes lingering on the whiskey glass I had abandoned, the faint scent of my cologne still lingering in the air. For years, this had been her home. Now she was just a guest in the ruins of the life she destroyed. She turned back to me, her hands trembling. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. I took my time, walking past her, pouring myself another drink. The sound of ice clinking against the glass was the only noise between us. Finally, I spoke. "Start with the truth." She swallowed hard. Not the version you've rehearsed in your head," I cut in smoothly, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "Not the sob story you plan to use to manipulate me into feeling sorry for you. The truth." Her jaw clenched. "I never meant to hurt you." I laughed, shaking my head. That's not the truth. That's just the first lie you're telling yourself. Tears welled in her eyes. Mark, please. You have to believe me. I was confused. I was scared. Scared of what? I asked, tilting my head. She hesitated. I stepped closer, dropping my voice. Scared that I wouldn't be enough for you? Or scared that I'd find out who you really are? Her breath hitched. You were enough, she whispered. You always were. Then why did you cheat? She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. I don't know. I smirked. Wrong answer. She let out a quiet sob, pressing a shaking hand to her forehead. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Mark. I swear I... Stop. My voice was firm, final. You keep saying you didn't mean for things to happen, but that's not how it works. You chose this, Vanessa. You planned this. You lied to my face every single day. You stood in our house, in our bed, and told another man you loved him while still wearing my last name. She was fully crying now, her body trembling, her fingers gripping the fabric of her dress like she could squeeze the past into something salvageable. Why are you here, Vanessa? I asked, my tone softer now, almost amused. Do you actually miss me? Or did you just run out of options? Silence. I let it hang between us. Let her sit in the truth for the first time. Finally, she whispered, I don't know. I sighed and took a sip of my drink. See, that's the problem with you. You never know anything, do you? She took a shaky breath, stepping closer. I do know one thing, she said, her voice desperate. I love you, Mark. I always have. I let out a slow breath through my nose. Then I smiled. You love me? She nodded quickly. Yes. I took another step forward, so close now I could see the mascara smudges under her eyes, the raw vulnerability she had never let me see before. Prove it, I whispered. Her breath caught. What? I tilted my head, lowering my voice. If you love me, Vanessa, prove it. She swallowed hard. How? I smirked. Leave. Her face crumpled. What? If you love me, walk away. Right now. Her lips trembled. But You came here hoping I'd save you, I said, my voice unwavering. That I'd be the safe place to land after you burned everything else to the ground. I shook my head. But that's not how this works. You don't get to destroy me and then expect me to put you back together. She sobbed quietly, shaking her head. Mark, please. No, I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of finality settle in my chest. You don't get to beg for the life you threw away. Her breathing hitched, her whole body trembling. She looked at me, really looked at me, as if searching for something that wasn't there anymore. Because it wasn't there anymore. I was done. She let out a ragged breath, her fingers loosening their grip on the dress, the fabric slipping through her hands. Then, finally, she nodded. And without another word, she turned and walked to the door. For a moment, she hesitated. She wanted me to stop her. She wanted me to give her a reason to stay. I said nothing. She pulled the door open, stepping into the cold night air. And then, she was gone. I closed the door, locked it. Then I turned, exhaling deeply, and walked away from the woman I once loved, without looking back. The house was quieter than it had been in years. No more late-night whispers that were never meant for me. No more scent of her perfume lingering in the air after she left for business trips. No more living with the ghost of a woman who had already moved on while still calling me her husband. Vanessa was gone. For real this time. And yet, the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like a pause. Like something, or someone, was still waiting in the shadows, holding its breath. I spent the next week putting the pieces of my life back together. Canceled joint accounts. Deleted photos. Threw away the anniversary cards I used to think meant something. Every trace of Vanessa was methodically erased, like she had never existed in this house. But some things couldn't be erased. Like the ring she had left behind on the nightstand. The one I had bought for her years ago, believing it symbolized forever. Like the whispers around town about the wedding disaster of the century. Like the fact that I still half expected her to walk through the door, lying through her teeth with another excuse. But she didn't. Not until the phone call. It came late, almost midnight. I had just poured myself a drink, settling into the quiet, when my phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, almost let it go to voicemail. But something, some instinct, told me to answer. I swiped my thumb across the screen. Yeah. Silence. Then, a breath. Then, Vanessa's voice. Mark. I didn't react. Didn't even blink. You shouldn't be calling me. I know. Her voice was hollow, stripped of its usual confidence. I didn't know who else to call. I exhaled slowly, pressing my fingers against my temple. What do you want? She hesitated. Then, her voice dropped, almost a whisper. It's Ethan. That got my attention. I straightened slightly. What about him? Another pause. Then, he's missing. I frowned. What do you mean, missing? I mean no one's seen or heard from him since the wedding. Her voice cracked slightly. His friends, his family, nothing. His phone is off. His car is still in his driveway. It's like he just vanished. A slow chill crept down my spine. Ethan had walked out of that church humiliated, but whole. He had shaken my hand, told me to take care, driven away like a man ready to move on. So where the hell was he now? I kept my voice even. And why are you telling me this? Because, she hesitated again, because a few days before the wedding, Ethan told me something. Something that didn't make sense at the time. My grip tightened around the phone. What did he say? She inhaled sharply. He said someone had warned him about me. Someone who told him to be careful, that I wasn't who he thought I was. I stilled. Ethan had never mentioned that to me. And you think that has something to do with his disappearance? I asked. I don't know, she admitted. But, Mark, I think someone was watching us. Even before the wedding. Even before everything fell apart. My pulse thrummed, slow and steady. Who? The line crackled with static. Then, I don't know. For the first time, Vanessa sounded genuinely afraid. And that was enough to make me listen. Vanessa was lying. Maybe not about everything, but definitely about something. I could hear it in the way her voice wavered, in the careful way she chose her words, like she was still trying to control the narrative. Ethan was missing. That much, I believed. But the idea that someone had been watching us? That someone had warned Ethan about her? That part felt off. I exhaled slowly, gripping the phone tighter. Vanessa, if you know something, really know something, you need to start talking. I don't know anything, she snapped, frustration cracking through her voice. I can't explain it, Mark. Ever since that night, I feel like someone's watching me. I leaned against the counter, my mind already working through the possibilities. Ethan had no reason to run. Not after the way he had handled the wedding. He had left with his dignity intact. But disappearing without a word? That wasn't like him. Unless something, or someone, made him disappear. I rubbed my jaw. Have you gone to the cops? A hesitation. Vanessa. My tone sharpened. She let out a slow breath. I tried. But they won't do anything yet. They said he's an adult, that people disappear for a few days all the time. Of course they did. To them, Ethan was just another guy licking his wounds after a broken engagement. But I knew better. And so did she. I sighed. Where are you? Mark, please don't. Where are you? A beat of silence. Then, my apartment. I grabbed my keys. Stay there. Are you coming here? She asked softly. I didn't answer. Just hung up. I didn't trust Vanessa, but I trusted my gut. And right now, it was telling me that whatever game was being played, we weren't the only ones in it anymore. I arrived at Vanessa's apartment in less than 20 minutes. It was late, past midnight, and the streets were nearly empty, a fine mist settling over the city. I parked across from her building, my eyes scanning the windows. Nothing unusual. I didn't know what I expected to find. Some shadowy figure lurking in the corners? A car idling suspiciously? Still, the unease in my chest didn't fade. I crossed the street, buzzed her apartment number, and a moment later, the door unlocked. Vanessa was waiting in the hallway when I stepped inside. She looked different. Not the confident, polished woman I had once married. Not even the broken bride I had left standing at the altar. She looked haunted. Her arms were wrapped around herself, her eyes darting past me as if expecting someone else to walk in behind me. I sighed. You look like hell. She let out a humorless laugh. Thanks. I followed her into the apartment. It was a mess. Clothes scattered, unopened mail stacked high on the table, an empty wine bottle on the counter. The Vanessa I knew had always been meticulous, obsessive about appearances. But this was a woman unraveling. She closed the door behind me, locking it with shaky fingers. I keep thinking I hear something, she muttered. Footsteps in the hall, my name in the wind. But when I check, there's no one there. I stayed quiet, watching her. Maybe I'm just paranoid, she whispered. Maybe. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Or maybe you're finally feeling what it's like to be the one left in the dark. Her eyes flicked to me, and for a second, something cold passed between us. Then she sighed, running a hand through her hair. You still don't believe me. I believe Ethan's missing, I said. I believe you're scared. What I don't believe is that you don't know more than you're letting on. She swallowed. I pushed off the counter, stepping closer. Who warned Ethan? I told you, I don't know. You do know, I pressed. You just don't want to say it. Her breath hitched slightly, and for the first time, real panic flashed in her eyes. And that's when I knew. She wasn't making this up. Someone had been watching. And whoever it was, they weren't done yet. Then, a sound, soft, muffled, coming from outside the apartment door. Both of us froze. Vanessa's wide eyes locked onto mine. I held up a hand, stay quiet, and stepped toward the door. My heart pounded, my muscles coiled tight as I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. Then, a slow, deliberate knock. 3 beats. Steady. Measured. Not the knock of someone who was lost. The knock of someone who knew exactly who was inside. Vanessa sucked in a sharp breath. I didn't move. Didn't blink. I just reached for the doorknob and turned it. The doorknob felt cold under my fingers, the silence stretching thin between Vanessa and me. Whoever was on the other side wasn't moving, wasn't speaking, just waiting. I inhaled slowly, then yanked the door open. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I stepped forward, scanning both directions. Nothing but dim, flickering overhead lights and the distant hum of the city outside. No retreating footsteps. No shadows slipping into doorways. But someone had been here. Vanessa let out a shaky breath behind me. Mark. I turned back to her, but something caught my eye before I stepped inside. A single envelope, resting neatly on the floor just beyond the threshold. I crouched, picking it up. No name, no address. Just a simple, off-white envelope, the kind you'd use for wedding invitations. I flipped it open, my stomach coiling as I pulled out the folded paper inside. One line, scrawled in sharp, deliberate handwriting. She's lying to you. The air in the hallway felt heavy. I could hear Vanessa breathing behind me, unsteady and unsure. I turned, stepping back inside, shutting the door behind me. I held up the note. You want to explain this? Vanessa's face drained of color. What is that? I watched her carefully. You tell me. She shook her head. I don't know. I stepped closer, my voice dropping. You're a liar, Vanessa. You've always been a liar. But I need to know. Are you lying about Ethan? Her lower lip trembled. No. I studied her for a long moment. She looked scared. But scared of what? That someone was watching her? That she had lost control? Or that her web of lies was finally starting to tangle around her? I held up the note between 2 fingers. Who would send this? I don't know, she snapped, frustration cracking through her fear. I don't know anything, Mark. I swear. The worst part? I almost believed her. But this was Vanessa, and the note in my hand told me one undeniable truth. Someone else was watching. Vanessa was lying. I didn't know how, or about what exactly, but the note in my hand made one thing clear. Someone else knew it too. I exhaled slowly, keeping my expression unreadable. You really expect me to believe that you don't know anything? Her arms wrapped around herself, her breath still uneven. I don't. I turned the note toward her. Then who sent this? Her eyes flicked to the paper, then away, too quickly. There it was. That slight hesitation, that split-second crack in her carefully rehearsed panic. I knew Vanessa. I knew every tick, every tell. And right now, she wasn't afraid because Ethan was missing. She was afraid because someone else knew why. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. What did you do, Vanessa? Her head snapped up. I didn't do anything. Another lie. I tilted my head. Who warned Ethan before the wedding? I told you. I don't know, she said, voice rising. But someone did warn him. I studied her carefully. And now, that same someone wants me to know you're lying. She swallowed, her hands gripping the fabric of her sleeves. Mark, please. And then, her phone rang. A sharp, sudden sound in the heavy silence. Her entire body jerked, her breath catching. My gaze flicked to her phone on the table. Unknown number. Vanessa didn't move. I grabbed the phone and answered. Hello? For a moment, nothing. Then, a voice. Low, calm. You should have left her at the altar. The line went dead. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, my pulse slow and steady. Vanessa looked like she might collapse. Who was it? She whispered. I set the phone down, staring at her. You tell me. She shook her head frantically. I don't know, I swear. I cut her off. No more lies, Vanessa. If you want me to help you, you tell me everything, right now. Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time, I saw something real behind them. Not manipulation, not calculation, just fear. Then she whispered, It's Ethan. My chest tightened. What? She swallowed hard. I didn't tell you everything. About the wedding, about what happened before. I waited. She took a shaky breath. A week before the ceremony, Ethan found something. A folder. On my laptop. I didn't speak. Just waited for her to keep digging her own grave. It was full of emails, bank statements, things I had sent to my lawyer about our divorce. Her voice dropped lower. And about the prenup. My jaw tightened. Ethan had money. I had always suspected as much. But what I didn't know, what Vanessa had never told me, was that she had made sure his money would become hers the moment they were married. She was planning to take him for everything. And Ethan must have found out. I exhaled sharply. What did he say? Her hands shook. He didn't say anything at first. He acted normal. But then, 2 nights before the wedding, he told me he knew. And that he was going to expose me. I let out a dry laugh. Well, that makes 2 of us. She flinched. Then, her voice dropped even lower. That night, he texted me. He said he was coming over. That we needed to talk. Something in my stomach curled tight. I stared at her. And? She shook her head. He never showed up. Silence. The room felt colder now. Vanessa licked her lips, her voice barely a whisper. I thought maybe he had changed his mind. That he just left. I studied her carefully. You thought, or you hoped? She didn't answer. Didn't have to. I exhaled slowly, rubbing my jaw. So let's sum this up. Ethan finds out you're planning to screw him over. He tells you he's going to expose you. Then, hours later, he disappears. Vanessa swallowed hard. And now, I continued, stepping closer, someone out there knows you're lying. Her breath hitched. I leaned in, my voice quiet. Where's Ethan, Vanessa? She shook her head quickly. I don't know. You were the last person he tried to see before he vanished. My voice was low, steady. So I'll ask you again. Where is he? A tear slipped down her cheek. I don't know, she whispered. And for the first time, I almost believed her. But the note, the phone call, told me one thing for certain. Someone knew exactly what happened to Ethan. And now, they were coming for Vanessa. If you like this story, please like and subscribe to the channel.